Hi, welcome to my podcast, Reclaim. I am your host, Thaís Sky. I have supported women navigate the complexities of being human for over 10 years. This podcast is where I disseminate some of those learnings and offer thoughts and guests to guide you into your healing. Welcome. Hello, beautiful humans. Thaís Sky here. Welcome to Reclaim the podcast. I am your host. I'm so happy to be here with you all today. I have a super special guest with us today. Andrea Owen is here. I act like she's here as in like she's in the house. Wouldn't that be great? This was like a radio show and we could be like, Andrea Owen is in the house. And then it could be like a live show. That'd be really great. Maybe someday. But for now, we're just going to have to be okay with the fact that actually I interviewed Andrea, just last week. And I'm really excited to share the interview I did with her last week with you all today. I've had Andrea on the podcast before for episode 15. So I've been a fan of Andrea for a long time, and I'm just really thrilled that she is here. We're going to be talking about making changes and why it's so hard to make the big changes, why we like the idea of changes, and how to make big changes within relationships. And of course, I bring in what I've been exploring with you all for the past few weeks. I bring that into the conversation as well, where we talk about the impulsive decision making. And Andrea had some really cool insights about that. So all of that is coming in just 1 minute. But first, I wanted to drop this in here in case it is useful for all of you. A few weeks ago, I opened up some spots in my calendar for new one-on-one coaching clients. Those spots are filling up. I wanted to give just one final mention here because I imagine by next week the spots will be taken. So if you have been interested in working with me, if you have listened to this podcast and have really resonated with the message, if you follow me on Instagram and you really enjoy my content, you enjoy this idea of doing the deeper inner work, but you're not sure how to do it. Life feels overwhelming. It feels like somehow you keep getting in your own way. The worthiness wound really takes up a lot of space in your life, and you're just ready once and for all to start to tackle these deeper layers within you so that you can take up greater space in your life, have more nourishing relationships, feel more in integrity with your desires, just have an increased general sense of well-being that inevitably comes when we spend time doing this deeper work. If you're interested in that, I invite you to reach out and book a session with me. A clarity session is a low pressure opportunity for us to get to know each other, for us to see if we would be a good fit, and for you to learn more about what working with me looks like. So you can go to thaissky.com/coaching, or just go to the show notes. Again, it's thaissky.com/coaching to learn more, and you can apply for a call right there and then we'll be in touch and we'll get to know each other and see if coaching is right for you. I love my one-on-one coaching. I love welcoming in new clients. It's such a special, rich energy of excitement. And it's this thrilling sense of endeavoring in a journey together, where we're finally going to make sense of some of the deeper rooted patterns that keep getting in your way, so that you can find a little bit more comfort in your life. Again, thaissky.com/coaching. Okay. All right, let me read to you Andrea's bio. Andrea Owen is an author, global speaker, and professional certified life coach who helps high-achieving women maximize unshakable confidence and master resilience. She has taught hundreds of thousands of women tools and strategies to be able to empower themselves to live their most kick-ass life through speaking, her books, coaching, and her wildly popular podcast with close to 3 million downloads. I've also been on her podcast, which is such a special treat. Andrea is the proud author of 2 books, which have been translated into 18 languages and available in 22 countries. And her latest book, Make Some Noise, Speak Your Mind, and Own Your Strength, is coming in August of 2021. In fact, it is now live. I got a chance to read it. It is so, so incredible. I got the advanced copy. You can go and sign up to get her book when it drops in August. I'm so excited for her. When she's not juggling her full coaching practice or writing books, Andrea is busy riding her Peloton bike, chasing her 2 school-aged children, and making out with her husband, Jason. She's also a retired roller derby player, having skated under the name Veronica Vane. I love this. I love Andrea. I love her book. I highly recommend checking it out. And like I said, this interview, I share some snippets of her book that really resonated with me, and we really dive into this idea of how to make changes in your life when you're really needing to change. So without further ado, let's bring her on. Hello, Miss Andrea. How are you doing?
Hi, babe. I'm so good. I'm so glad to be here and get to talk to you again.
I will not forget when I got the privilege of joining your dinner party in Los Angeles.
That's right.
And everyone was wearing jackets and pants. And I think, had a scarf on. And
that was you that had a scarf.
In
Santa Monica. Well, it was January, in your defense.
Yes. No, I am not making fun of myself. I'm making fun of you here.
Because I was in a sundress.
You were in a sundress. That's right.
Well, I was born and raised in Southern California, so I get it. But I've been on the East Coast, and I'm in North Carolina. Like, we don't get winters. Like, we get very mild winters, but I've definitely acclimated. And I feel like it was like 60 degrees, and you guys were freezing. I was like, this is amazing.
I will never forget that. That was such a joy. It's such a real pleasure in getting to like see you and meet you and be in your energy for that dinner. And that was the launch of your previous book, which is like, oh my gosh, look at you. So you wrote a book, How to Stop Feeling Like Shit. Wonderful book. Mm-hmm. That was your second.
That was
book.
My second. Mm-hmm.
And now you are kind of out in the world with your third book. And I'm like, we get it. You're ambitious. You have a lot of books in you. Like, stop rubbing it in for the rest of us who can't even seem to whip out one. So, but I am such a fan of this book. I'm such a fan of your writing style. I'm such a fan of how you think about the world. And so I'm just tickled pink that I get a chance to interview you again for Reclaim the Podcast.
Yeah, well, I'm honored. I love your work too. You've been instrumental in, some different areas of my life. And so I'm just glad that I get to talk to you and to talk about this book, because I mean, obviously I'm biased, but I think it's important because it's sort of, this book came of age in a very interesting time, I think, for all of us.
Mm-hmm. I agree. You know, the first interview that I did on the podcast, which I'll link in the show notes, is all about expanding the comfort zone. And we were talking about why it's so hard for us to do things that are uncomfortable. And I think a really good segue, something that like I was thinking about when I was reading the beginning of your book, is this idea of like taking action. And I want to read, actually, I want to like literally verbatim read this part of the book, because I know it's just at the very beginning, but it just really caught my eye because it's so relevant to like I've been talking about on the podcast, which is, okay, in order to change your life, you have to change your life. As obvious as that may sound, you might be surprised how many people don't realize the amount of action they have to take in order to get the things and the life they want. Therefore, you'll hear me talking a lot about taking specific action in the chapters ahead. When I was first starting out on my own personal self-development journey, I would read personal growth books and write the names of my friends and ex-boyfriends in the margins, pointing to certain traits and problems that other people had, thinking that if they would just change their life and my life would be better. In other words, I liked the idea of change, and I especially liked it for other people. It took me about a decade to realize if I wanted my life to change, I had to change, and I had to do it myself. I feel like that those 2 paragraphs are so profound, and I would love to hear like, why did you start with that? You know, like, what was the inspiration behind that? And what does it mean for when you think about like, if you want to change your life, you have to change your life.
Yeah. Okay. So that was a two-parter. So as someone with ADHD, I might need to have you like reel me in to talk about that last part.
I don't know if it's a very good like interview structure. Like, let me ask you 20 questions and I expect you to remember them.
I'm pretty good at this, but still. Well, I am a fan of telling the truth. Like I always have been since I was a small child. You know, people used to joke, Andrea is the one who would point out that the emperor is naked. And growing up, I'm Generation X, and you know, I was raised by actually my parents are older than boomers. They're part of the silent generation where we didn't talk about problems, things like that. So it was this very uncomfortable, you know, I had my socialization and conditioning, but on the inside, I desperately wanted to tell the truth. So now I sort of half joke that I'm making up for it. That's part of why I said that is that I want people to understand from the get-go, please don't put me on a pedestal. I am still learning right alongside with you. I may just be farther along on the path. But also, I wanted to say that because I think that is the case for a lot of people who read and indulge in personal development. They like the idea of it. And as someone who was a pretty severe codependent, we love the idea of controlling others. And how that manifested for me was seeing all of the ways and listing all of the ways that they should change, that they could have a better life because that would reflect on me and that would impact me. That's how I wanted to change my life. And I don't think I'm alone in that. I think that's a lot of people. So I wanted to point that out in case someone is doing that unconsciously, that they might go like, oh, I might be doing that.
Yeah.
And it's not everyone, but I do think it's a fair amount of people.
I mean, sure. I look at my husband all the time. I'm like, if you could only change, our lives would be so much better. Like if you could just be different, things would be different. You know, sometimes I even say it to him. I was like, if you could only just do what I want you to do,
right, things
would be better. And I mean that in like jokingly ways, for like the small things. Like if you could just be neat like me, things would be better. Organized. But I'm also talking about like really much more complicated like relational dynamics of like, if you could just be different, everything would be different. So go ahead, go take that to your therapist. Good luck, have fun, go do that. And then when you come back, things will be better between us.
Yeah. And you point to something that I want to underscore in that when we want people to be different, we're not always wrong for wanting that. Like maybe someone is an addict and their life would be better if they got help and faced sobriety and recovery. But we can't, couple things. We have to give people the dignity of their own process, which is excruciking.
It's the worst. Fuck that.
It is the worst.
Actually, I don't like that at all.
I don't either. I
need to write like the unpersonal development book. Right. That sounds like awful advice.
I want their process to go my way. But we need to give people the dignity of their own process, which is hard and involves surrender and boundaries and acceptance and all those things. And also we need to not base our happiness on that. And sometimes there are very real issues where if someone doesn't change or at least make the attempt and make progress, then we might need to set some boundaries and make some hard choices.
I mean, this is a topic that my group program, Worthy Women Rise, the women are really grappling with right now. You know, they've been in this process. This cohort is a year long, and we're going to be done in about 2 months. So we've been grappling with some really, beautiful things, worthiness for 10 months, right? 10 months of thinking about all the ways that this is, and they're starting to see some things change and shift, and they're wanting to play with some new relational skills that they're developing. They're wanting to have deeper, more meaningful relationship with their friends, partner, parents, etc. And so they'll go to their partner so excitedly, being like, "Oh, I want this. I think we need to talk about this. I want this." And they're practicing, and it's really hard. And then they come back into the group and now have to grapple with but they didn't get as excited as me.
Yeah,
they're not on the same trajectory. They're not looking at growth in the same way I am. I introduced this idea to my partner and he's kind of meh about it. And now what do I do? Like, how do I get the people in my life to go on this journey with me? And it's a really valid and difficult question that, like you said, requires us sometimes to think about some really difficult things, like, can this relationship come with us? What is it going to take within ourselves, within the relationship, or within the other for them to come along with us?
Yeah. That is a very real, I don't know if I want to call it a problem, experience that I have faced in my previous marriage and my current one now, which is, this one is much healthier than the previous one. But my husband and I were talking about this a couple of months ago, and how we both have had periods of time. I'm not even sure if it was the same time. It might have been, it might have not been, where we weren't sure that we were going to make it.
Yeah.
And we've been married for 13 years now. And I think the thing that was a turning point for us, and I hope this can be helpful based on what you just said for people, is that, you know, I work in this field. So it's hard, I think. And he's expressed to me, he's like, it's hard when you're the expert and you speak the same language as the therapist when we go to counseling, and you guys are totally on the same page and you're saying words that I don't know what they mean. And it's challenging. And so I heard him and I listened, and I had to grapple with the fact that I was making up a story about how I wanted our progress to look.
Yeah.
Mostly the speed of it. Like, I wanted him to grow as quickly as I was.
Yeah.
I wanted our evolution to happen in leaps and bounds.
Yeah.
And that wasn't fair. That was really unfair. And he had his own work to do. And so I remember we had this sort of like a come to Jesus conversation right outside of the therapist's door. And I heard everything he was saying. And I said to him, okay, all I expect from you is progress. That's all. That's really all I can expect. And I had to also name what that looked like, because that can be very abstract. It's sort of like saying, like, I want you to be more romantic. Well, what the hell does that even mean? So progress to me means like being open to hard conversations, saying what you're feeling without tiptoeing around me and worrying about what's going to happen, learning how to communicate in a kind and graceful and open manner. And there's so many books out there. John Gottman's work is great on this. And also just, we needed to, and also when COVID happened, my husband left his job, which we knew going into that was going to be a whole new thing for us. I told him, I said, we need to walk into this eyes wide open and have conversations about hard things before they become a problem. Because we've been married long enough now, like, where we can sniff it out and we can't avoid it and just like hope it's going to work out. So I hope that's helpful. And it's just, again, like, I want to just bottom line it that, like, I had to decide that all, like, the minimum for me was progress. And it was not up to me, like, what that was going to look like and how fast it was going to be.
Yeah, I think we often expect that the relationships outside of us is going to mirror maybe the growth and realizations that we're having internally. But I think part of doing this work is being able to recognize that not everyone is on the same journey as us. You know, there was a point in time when I thought that the fact that I had this language, the world of psychology, the world of personal development, meant that I was better than, right? It meant that, like, I was
we can
elite.
get contemptuous real fast.
Like, I am morally superior in some way because communication and growth is important to me. And everyone's growth looks different. And this can be really hard to come to terms with. I can see in my partner something that I think he needs to grow in, and he doesn't agree. And so then it becomes, like you said at the beginning, like a grappling of how much of my own confidence, well-being am I going to be placing on whether or not this other person agrees with me and how they should be doing their life, growing, developing, etc. It can be really hard, particularly like in your example with your husband, with someone that we were committed to, right? It's not like a friendship where we can, unfortunately, in our culture, we tend to ditch friendships very quickly and see them a little bit more discardable. But in relationships that can't be easily discarded, it can be very difficult because it often leaves us in ambiguity. There is no answer, right? There is no this is the way it is now. It's just tolerating the tension of two individuals being together.
Yeah. And I also think that you kind of have to realize, like, what are your non-negotiables in your friendships, in your relationships with your family, and in your long-term partners and your intimate partnerships. So if you're with somebody who's a misogynist and isn't willing to look at that and have hard conversations and unlearn his or her conditioning, maybe that's a non-negotiable for you. And you're the only one who can decide that. But, it's like, my husband like wears Crocs and like leaves them out all over the place. And I'm like, you know what, if that's the worst of it, I fine. I love you.
That's, I don't know. That may be my deal breaker. I'm like, foul.
At least they're not camo. They're just black. That would be a non-negotiable if they were camo.
Yeah, that would be pretty bad. At least the joke here, though, is, right, if it's camo, you can't see it.
Right.
That's really bad. Okay. So part of this, the 2 paragraphs that I read, part of what really resonated with me is this idea that we like change. We like the idea of it. We like what it could mean, what it represents for us. But then doing things different can often feel impossible.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Like, I felt that way before I got sober. I liked the idea of people who were in recovery and they seemed like they were having fun. And I liked the idea of having a totally clear mind to be able to focus on other things. But when it come down to actually quitting drinking, wasn't as interested.
Yeah.
I wanted both. I wanted all the greatness that came with it, and not the actual taking action. And I think that happens a lot with people, especially who listen to and consume what I call surface level personal development, which is very inspirational and motivational. And I think that those are great sometimes. Like, we need those people of the world. And I love a good YouTube, like Nike commercial, like walking away from it feeling like you can run through a brick wall. Gimme, like, I love it. And that's not enough for long-term change. It's really not. And I wish that it was enough. And I was not happy when I found out that there was so much more involved to actually changing your life. But the reason I go on and on about it is because, like, I want to normalize it. Like, I want to just normalize how scary it is and how awkward and how non-linear it is, and how even after 15 years of being divorced, I'm still talking about what happened to me in my former marriage in trauma therapy. Like, this shit sticks around, and I am not happy about it. And I didn't want it. I didn't like it. And I felt there was some shame around that of like, why am I still talking about this? And anyway, I'm kind of going off topic here, talking about trauma and somatic things and stuff like that. But I want to just underscore that some of the things that people really do, quote unquote, need to work on are big, heavy, scary things.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that you can't do it.
Well, and I think this is what I've been talking about on the podcast, is that there's this narrative that change that is meant to be, or the things that we want, the changes that are required will feel good. Yes, that, like, if healing is working, it feels good, and it's happening quite quick. And I think we get marketed this idea. I think it's pretty prolific in the coaching industry that if it's right, it's fast. And then you're going to have a breakthrough, and you're going to have these aha moments, and then it's going to feel good. And then it's going to be uncomfortable, but only temporarily. Like, it's a temporary discomfort. But then you're going to get to the other side quite quickly, where you're going to feel totally changed. And I wish that I could, sell that because it's so sexy. But what I continue to gravitate towards those 2 paragraphs is that it really highlights that this work is not actually particularly sexy. And it often looks like being stuck in grappling with really, really bad, yucky feelings over and over and over and over again.
100%. I remember being on a call with a prospective client, and she was wanting to go through a program with me, and we were sort of dancing around this question that I was sort of reading between the lines that she had, and she was wanting this to be her solution. Like she had done other programs and didn't feel like she was complete, and was basically asking me like, is this the answer? And I was very forthright with her and said, this will help you if you do the work. Like I can guarantee that you're going to walk away with science-backed methodologies and tools in your toolbox. But this is a lifelong thing. You're going to walk away shifted, but you're not going to walk away fixed, or like, I can never guarantee that. And if anybody is telling you that, they should have no, that's not true. And I can't remember if she ended up signing up or not, but like, I never want someone to walk into working with me thinking that it's going to be the end all be all for them. Cause it's not for me either.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, kind of like, thinking and continuing to process what happened in your ex-marriage, it's like our healing comes in layers and levels, and it's like this spiral of revisiting certain things over and over and over again from different perspectives. And this is not a concept that's new. I didn't create this concept or whatever. It's kind of known around town, but I do like to repeat it often because I think we get so caught up in thinking that it is linear, thinking that, okay, this thing happened, we process it, and now it's over, and now it will be post whatever that is. Like now I will be on the other side of this, and I will be a new person, reborn, where this old thing no longer affects me. And it's just not what I have found to be true, literally ever. And so I don't know where we're getting this idea, but it's prolific. It's very exciting, and it's just not what it looks like.
100%. I believe you 100%. And I can't remember who it was. It wasn't Britney, but there was some other celebrity in the gossip something lately. And I can just tell that this person was hurting, and whatever it was that they were talking about was something from like years prior. And I'm like, oh, this is still a thing. And, it doesn't have to be these egregious traumas that people have been through. They can be small things over time that continue to get triggered. And I was diagnosed with complex PTSD, and having that diagnosis was incredibly bittersweet because I was first thinking, oh, Jesus Christ, like I don't want it. Like this sounds really big. But also it made so much sense. Like it was a sense of relief.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is why I keep dreaming about it. This is why I keep getting triggered in my current marriage. This is why talk therapy hasn't totally worked for me, that I needed something more. And so, I don't expect there to ever be a post for me. Like my emotional and mental abuse started when I was 17, very formative years. And my childhood, luckily, was pretty great, except for like some abandonment issues around puberty with my dad. But, like it matters and it stays with us. And I don't say that to be doom and gloom. Like, oh, just wait for it. You're going to be in your 40s like me and still be carrying it around. Monica Lewinsky was on the TED Radio Hour, and she was talking about her trauma that she faced in the 90s and being humiliated publicly, and how, she's still in therapy for it. And she talks about how her trauma for so long felt like a hummingbird, and her goal was to make the echo not as loud. And now it's like a condor. And I loved that metaphor so much because that's how I feel. And some days the condor's squawking, but for the most part, the hummingbird is no longer there. And what I gather from that is intensity. Hummingbirds are pretty intense, and the intensity has definitely gone way down, but it's still there and it still pops up every once in a while. And I've just learned to live with it. And in some ways, I wouldn't say I befriended it, but just accepted that it's there and that there is no post. This is just part of who I am.
Yeah. What do you imagine then, or what have you seen to be one of, I imagine there are many, but what do you see as one of the main reasons why people are so afraid of change or of taking the steps that would change their lives. I know this is kind of an existential question, but
yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons, and I'm super fascinated with why people behave the way that they do. And I do think that we are just humans are sacks of unconscious reactions that we do every day based on previous experiences. That being said, I also think that there's something very real to be said about how change is just scary. We're creatures of habit. The neural pathways get created and we don't like to change them. And there's probably, and I don't know what the research is on this. You might know more about this than I do, but our brains also like to burn the least amount of calories as possible. Like they're trying to survive. So that's probably has something to do with it too, that just change requires more thought. It requires managing our fear response. It requires planning, and it's that whole comfort zone thing that you were talking about. And I do think that there are some personalities that are more quick to take action. Personally, I have a high risk tolerance, which also is great for entrepreneurship. But still, I don't like, there are some change that I really, really don't like, that I would rather just stay the same. So I don't know if I'm answering your question or not. Like you said, it's pretty existential, but I think that humans, we're just creatures of habit and we like things to stay the same.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that maybe if we knew going into a change that there was going to be like a purification process, so to speak, that, we may be better set up for when it happens. I mean, have been talking I've been sharing this on my podcast, and I've been talking about this with my therapist about wanting to kind of tend to this thing that I do, which is I tend to be quite impulsive, particularly when it comes to like really big decisions. And I accredit many of the big changes in my life, like where I went to college and moving across the country and to LA and so many of these big decisions, I put it on like my kind of fuck it mentality. You kind of think about it for a little bit. And you're like, you know what? Fuck it. Let's just do it. YOLO. Like, why not? Like, that's what goes on in my mind, right? And like, how do you argue with that, right? Like, God, like, let's just do the thing. Whatever
it's
happens,
like a life coach's wet dream right there. Like, just go for it.
Yeah, that's my personality. So I told her at the beginning, like, I don't know if I want to be making decisions from that place anymore. Like, I wonder what I may be actually running away from doing it that way. Not that there's anything bad or wrong about the people who do it that way. It's just not maybe how I want to be. I kind of have a mind and experience of myself that I'm craving, which is to be slower, more embodied, more vast, spacious within myself, not as reactive. I kind of have this vision of what I could be and what I crave and what I'm wanting. Okay, I'm getting to my point. So there came a point in time, Andrea, where like my partner and I are now debating moving and thinking about moving to Central Coast, moving away from LA. And I kid you not, I went to therapy, like, we decided we're moving. And she's like, well, why don't we slow it down here? Like you said that you want to kind of slow it down and not make these, and like, maybe this is your opportunity to do that. And I kicked and screamed and threw a tantrum and was like, you are bad. And why are you making me do this? And this is intolerable. And I was literally in Hawaii for my birthday, like crying and throwing a tantrum about like everything is going to combust if I don't make this decision. Wow. Why are people getting in my way? Like, and anyway, so the whole point is, here's the point. Change is hard.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel good. And it can often feel like the exact opposite of this kind of intuitive gut reaction, kind of this is right feeling. It may actually not feel right, because if it felt right, it may just be similar or familiar conditioning, right? Like what you talk about in your book. Like, we are conditioned. That is what's familiar. And so change may require us to do something that really threatens that familiarity. And it can feel so utterly wrong.
Yes, I see that point. And also you bring up another point about intuition and how we can talk about that too, because I have my irritations with that whole topic as well. But I feel like what you were talking about points to coaching, because and I don't mean, just that you like to change so quickly, but a lot of times, at least in my experience in my training, that it's not about taking the action. It is about that, but a lot of times it's just about what comes up when you think about it or actually take the action. So for example, like clearly you had a reaction when your therapist asked you to do something fairly simple. So there's something going on there. Like, and it might not be all that big of a deal. Like it might not be related to some childhood shattering of trauma that you had. Like sometimes it's kind of nothing. It's just interesting. But I love when people do that and get curious, because it gets you in the habit of just noticing your reactions.
Yeah.
And maybe why are you reacting that way? Again, not good or bad.
Right. And yeah, that is part of the it's not about the decision itself often enough. It's about our relationship to the decision and our what's happening internally for us as we're making that decision. And it's all it can all feel very unfamiliar.
Exactly.
And I think that that's where getting support can feel really important, whether depending on what you're seeking, it's a coach or a therapist or whatever, but somebody who can be in that discomfort with you. And what's amazing is that so much of our healing happens when we go through really painful things and then we don't collapse, right? Like we don't die. We don't die. Internally re-traumatize or re-experience the pain. It's like we can talk, like we went through something shitty and we survived it. And that in and of itself can be more healing than any decision that you make or end up making about where you live or what you do, etc.
Well, big picture, that's where self-confidence and resilience comes from, which is the foundation of what I talk about. And that's, yes, I love that topic. Like absolutely, positively. Many times it doesn't work out in our favor, but that's not the point. Like, would it be great if it worked out in your favor and moving to Central Coast is the best thing you ever did? Yes, but not always. But you're going to learn something no matter what.
Right. That's right. Well, I would like to open that can of worms if you are so inclined about your thoughts around intuition.
Yeah. One thing that I noticed, I've talked about intuition in both of my previous books, and I kept circling back to the times in my life where I couldn't tell if my intuition, because the question that we get often in personal development is like, how can I tell the difference in my body between intuition and fear? And there's some more obvious things that happen for some people that would be helpful for them to hone it. But I noticed for me that there were some instances where I really could not tell if it was my intuition or if it was fear. And I was using all of the tools that I had. And I'm like, this really feels like it's the same, intuition and fear. So what's going on? So luckily I have a lot of friends who are therapists, very experienced therapists. And I asked one of them who has a lot of experience in trauma therapy. And I asked her, what's the link between trauma and intuition? And she was incredibly helpful. And I quoted her in my book, and she was connecting the dots with people who have trauma. So for instance, if you grew up in a house where there was addiction with a parent and everything gets swept under the rug and nobody ever talked about it, you're basically being gaslit because you have a reality that is not being expressed. Or if you do try to talk about it and then the next day everybody is acting like everything's fine. And I give an example of a woman that I know who was telling her story about how that, she had a mentally ill parent and now as an adult, she's climbed the corporate ladder, but she said, still I ignore my intuition because I don't know what's up or down. She's like, I felt like I've lost the ability to listen. And so now when I see it online, like people saying, just trust your intuition, just trust your gut, like it's that easy. It's like, I don't think that we need to put a disclaimer on every single thing we put out there, but I would be happier if some people especially in like the spiritual wellness world, acknowledged that is fairly common. And because there's a lot of people out there who can't listen to their intuition, who think that they're broken and are wondering what's wrong with them. And that might be the case for them.
Yeah. Well, I actually think that that's more true than not true. I tend to, and I could be convinced otherwise, and I know there's a lot of complexity here, but I tend to view listening to intuition as a pretty advanced skill that requires us to be able to tolerate quite a bit internally for us to discern. And I think it's actually very difficult for many of us to tolerate all of the complexities that come up inside, because there's trauma, there's multiple layers of conditioning. There's, like I said, like familiarity patterns can just sweep us under, and patterns may or may not come from trauma, but they certainly feel pretty powerful. And it can be hard to discern the difference between what is our regular pattern that we run and what is intuition. Gosh, and it's just one of those things where I agree. It would be great to have some asterisks around these sweeping declarations, because you're so right. It's so complicated. And I really love that you have a whole section in the book about, learning from this kind of built-in wisdom, right? Like we all have it. That's the good news, is that none of us are too broken to have it, but how to learn to listen to it is a whole beast.
It is a whole beast. And I just want to underscore everything you said. It's incredibly complicated and nuanced. And for some people, it's not complicated.
Yeah.
I think that some people, I don't know if it's, like a clairvoyant type of thing happening, which I wish that I was more of. I am a little bit, but it's one of those things that I just want to really, really highlight that you said it is an advanced skill that absolutely can be learned. There are some great teachers out there who are trauma informed, and I just don't. Again, bottom line, I don't want people to think that they're broken if they have trouble discerning.
Well, and I like this paragraph that you wrote. The thing about intuition is this: when we don't listen to it, it will surely come back to haunt us. It becomes an elephant in the room, felt solely by us. Only this elephant has a rabid attitude, waits and waits until the time is right and bites us in the ass. And I, appreciate the reminder that good news about intuition is that it is continually here and continually communicating, and it will continue to feel off until it gets our attention. We don't have to learn how to read microscopic lettering. Eventually it will get big enough that it will feel like it will make itself known, when something is feeling really off.
Yeah. And the biggest experiences that I heard from women, their lessons with not listening to their intuition came, number one, from relationships, and number two, from work experiences. So whether they took a job where their intuition was telling them it's not a good idea, or they, listened to a boss or let a coworker take over a project or something like that, and it ended up exploding in their face. But the number one absolutely was relationships, friendships too, not just romantic relationships, but.
Interesting. When I wonder if that can loop back around to what we were talking about at the beginning of who needs to change, right? The other person or ourselves, and how much of our intuition is actually guiding us to have more deeper, nourishing relationships, but it requires a set of relational skill set that just doesn't come by just demanding that people be different in order for the relationship to happen.
Yeah, that's such an interesting conversation. I'm so glad that you talk about this. And, my first book, I wrote it in 2012, back when I was seeped in toxic positivity, and I wrote a chapter about walking away from friendships that you've outgrown. And there's a few edits in that book I wish I could make, but that's the downside of traditional publishing. But I think you make a really great point, and I have a personal example of that. So I have a friend that broke up with me probably about, oh gosh, it's been over 10 years, and it was excruciating. And she was going through a really hard time. Her mom had a terminal illness, and I was having all kinds of drama. She just did not have the energy for me. And, I can't speak for her, but and we've made amends, and we've talked about it, and it's good now, but she just mostly ghosted me. And when I kept badgering her, like, where are you? Why won't you see me or return my calls? She kind of said, like, I can't do this friendship anymore. And she basically just said, like, there's just too much drama. I don't have the energy for it. And of course I was devastated and wasn't going to argue with her. She was right. So then years go by, and we tried to patch things up, and it kind of fell apart because I had moved. And then I wrote about her and how to stop feeling like shit. Obviously didn't use her name, and I was talking about how painful it is to grieve a friendship, especially when you're not 100% sure what it is that you did. Yeah. And then lo and behold, right before that book came out, she popped up in my Facebook Messenger and was like, hey, just wondering how you're doing. And I was like, holy shit. And I felt like I had dug up a dead body, because I was hurt, like, seeing her come back, where I felt like I had grieved her. And so I ended up going out to San Diego, and we had dinner, and there were lots of tears, and we had a very candid, open-hearted conversation about what was actually happening years before for both of us. And we were both able to listen to each other about how we hurt one another. Yeah. And she told me, like, how she wished she would have done it differently. And she also told me how I was not a great friend. And I wasn't. I did not have the skill set back then to know how to be a great friend like I do now. And it was such a beautiful, I wish everyone could experience this, because it was such a beautiful sort of, being together in our 20s, moving apart in our 30s, and then coming back together in our 40s. And we're so much more mature now as women, and are able to hold each other up and also take responsibility for the way we weren't great to each other, the way that we hurt each other, and truly make amends. As someone who was still drinking before and severely codependent, I could have never had that conversation. I could have never taken accountability for my actions. I would have put the blame on someone else. I would have been defensive and just so hurt by it. But it is a very amazing thing to be able to tell someone how they've hurt you, and know it's going to be well received, and vice versa. And I know that is not super common. I wish that it was.
And that's what's really sad, is that it's not common. And I think that that's what we're kind of missing in so many circles, so many conversations in the self-development world. It's all about development of self, but what about development of relationships? And, this is a theory that I'm kind of playing around with in my mind that has no scientific evidence whatsoever. But I've just been wondering, like, how many times when we say introversion, what we're really talking about is social anxiety, right? And when we're talking about extroversion, we're really talking about a fear of being alone. Like, how much are these kind of personality things that we feel is just who we are is actually relational wounding, relational fears of what it means to actually engage in intimate, nourishing relationships. And I feel like I could just digress and talk about that all day, but it is something
we could go down that road if you want. Yeah.
That, like, I think is really important, is to have these experiences of coming together and coming to terms with how much our patterns, our conditioning actually moves us away from the types of relationships that we want, the type of growth that we want.
Yeah, true. Everything that you said, I applaud and agree with. And I'm thinking of the hard conversation I had with her, when we were in person and we went to dinner, and I'll tell you what, I was both looking forward to it and not looking forward to it. I don't like hard conversations. People ask me, like, oh, it must be so easy for you. And I'm like, fuck no, like it's not. I would rather not, but I know what's on the other side, and that's what makes it worth it. And there's something really beautiful. Like, nobody likes to be told how they were being a bad wife or a bad friend or a bad sister. It sucks. It's like a gut punch. However, being able to, and I'm not saying this happens all the time, like I think sometimes people make up narratives that aren't true, but it's really feels really good to take responsibility if you have had some bad behaviors and truly hear the person and apologize and talk about how you're going to do better. Like that, I never knew before that feels incredible. Yeah. It feels so much better than being defensive and making excuses.
I binge watched Too Hot to Handle this weekend, and I don't really like reality TV. Not really.
Oh, it's a reality show? I thought it was an old movie.
No, Too Hot to Handle is a Netflix.
Like a cooking show?
Reality. You're so cute. It's like you're living under this very sweet, like 50s rock. No, it's a reality show where they put what is it, like 10 really hot.
Oh, I think I've seen like the ad for it.
Really like hot, fit, young men and women, and they have to abstain from sex or kissing.
They win a prize, yeah.
And they win a prize, but how much money they win is determined by how little they break the rules. Every time you kiss, you lose $3,000 from this fund. And then
are they trying to entice each other the whole time?
Well, they can't help it because they're so hot and horny. Right?
Oh,
like
my
it's
God.
just so good. It's so good. My husband cannot tolerate being in the same room with me as I'm watching this. It's really bad, Andrea. It's really bad, but it's so delicious.
But I'm going to go watch it now.
Yes, it's so bad and so good. Anyway, so there was a workshop they did. Oh, so they do self-development workshops to become
Where
better.
Do I sign up to go teach them?
I instantly look up who they bring in, and there are people that we know that are in the community. So you should be on that. I would love to see you on there. Okay.
It'd be fun.
So they did this workshop where there was this girl, this guy, and they were together at the beginning, and then they had this falling out, and then they had all this animosity, and they had this activity where they had to gag each other and then just vent. Okay. So she gagged him, he could not speak, and then she just went off and said her piece, and then he did the same, and everything changed after that. They didn't need to have this complex conversation back and forth. She just needed to get it all out. He needed to get it all out, and things changed. Now, we both know that it's a lot more complicated than that. But what I really appreciated about that exercise and that showing the world is that things get better when you talk about it. And it's just this magical thing that we always forget, but things get better. The relationship may not, but we get better. Things change and shift when we talk about it, when we engage in conversations about it, like you did with your friend. And it's hard to keep that in mind because I feel like so many of us are conditioned to play nice, to keep our feelings in, to not have these difficult conversations, not be in conflict. But that's what your story reminded me of. So now you have to go watch the show, and
I will, and I'm going to report back
what you think. Yeah. Yeah.
I loved Selling Sunset. That's probably the only reality show I've watched recently. But I want to point to that word that you just used. And I know we need to wrap up soon, but how many times have you heard from women, I don't want to set a boundary because I don't like conflict?
Yes.
And my response to that always is, nobody likes conflict. And if they do, they're an asshole. You probably don't want to have a relationship with them. Why don't we reframe it from conflict to a hard conversation? Because that's really what it is. It's a hard conversation. And I, in my experience, they're never as long as we think they're going to be.
And they're usually not as hard. Also, it's really not. The anticipation of the hardness is often harder than the actual conversation. So I would even go from, I don't want to be in conflict to, I just don't want to talk about this.
Yeah. Because that's the truth of it.
That's the truth. The truth is you just want someone to do your thing without you communicating it, because you don't really want to own that this is your thing. You don't really want to talk about it. You don't want to deal with the fact that the other person may have feelings about it. But the good news is it is so much easier to do. Once you start doing it, it becomes a little bit of a high. You start to realize that no one's going to kill you. No one's going to blow up. The awful things you imagine that's going to happen isn't going to happen. So I love that you offer that. I think that's so brilliant. I think that's so on point. And I also know we got to wrap it up. So I'm going to stop talking and move us into wrapping it up, because I feel like I could just keep going with you.
Same.
Any final thoughts?
No, just I'm doing a free book club, and there's a free workbook for anybody that really wants to dig in and not just, excuse me, that was my dog. Just sneezed. She snuck in here, by the way. She's not supposed to be here. She snuck in the room. Okay. Sneeze aside, bless you, Giselle. If anybody wants to dig in more, it's AndreaOwen.com/noise. And they can sign up for all the bonuses, and there's a bunch of free stuff, and it's not junk. Like it's like a workbook and a book club and things like that. Cool. It's great stuff.
Cool. Well, I will make sure to add that to the show notes for all of the people. Congratulations.
Thanks, honey.
I
know that you'll write one too, if you want.
I will write one.
And you should just make the decision.
Yeah. Yes. I know. I remember going into a Barnes and Noble and just seeing your book and being like, I know her. And it's such a cool feeling to like know these people in my life are doing all these things that are out in the world. Like you're doing it. You're doing these amazing things that are out in the world. And I'm just so, I say proud, not like I'm better than you, like, oh, you're a kitty, but more like I'm just so proud, so delighted in you and your work. And thank you for being on my podcast and for sharing your thoughts, and we'll stay in touch.
Thank you. It's always such a smart conversation with you. And I'm going to have you back on my show selfishly because I want to talk to you again. So
let's do it.
I'll see you then. Okay. Thanks everybody for listening.
Sounds good.
Okay.